The psychology of people who speak a lot and later regret what they said. It happens every time. The conversation is flowing. The energy is good. And something inside you just opens up. Words start coming out. Fast. Freely. More than you planned. More than you meant. You are talking and some part of you is watching it happen and thinking, okay, wrap it up now, but you cannot seem to find the break. And then the conversation ends. And the silence arrives. And that is when it starts. The replay. That thing you said about your coworker. Did you say too much? That personal story you shared with someone you barely know. Why did you share that? That opinion you delivered with way too much confidence. What if you were wrong? That joke that landed slightly flat. That comment that came out harsher than you meant. That truth you told that maybe should have stayed inside. And now you are lying awake at 1 a.m. having a full courtroom session inside your own head. Replaying. Cringing. Rewinding. Asking yourself the same question you have asked 100 times before. Why do I always do this? Here is what most people assume about people who talk too much and regret it later. They assume they are careless, impulsive, lacking self-awareness, that they simply do not think before they speak. But here is what is actually true in the vast majority of cases. The people who struggle most with oversharing, overtalking, and post-conversation regret are almost never careless. They are almost never unaware. In fact, they are often the most self-aware people in the room. They feel everything intensely. They care deeply about how they come across. They want connection more than almost anything. And it is precisely those qualities, the intensity, the caring, the hunger for connection, that drive the very behavior they spend hours regretting afterward. This is not a character flaw. This is a specific psychological pattern. And understanding it is the first step to finally breaking it. Let's go inside the brain for a moment. When human beings feel safe, seen, and stimulated in a social environment, the brain releases a surge of dopamine. The same chemical involved in reward, pleasure, and motivation. This dopamine surge has a very specific effect on verbal behavior. It lowers the brain's inhibitory response, the internal filter that normally evaluates what is about to be said before it gets said. Think of it like a gate. Under normal conditions, the gate is partially closed. Thoughts line up, get checked, and only the approved ones pass through into spoken words. But when dopamine is surging in an exciting conversation, in a moment of deep connection, in a social environment that feels electric and alive, that gate swings wide open. And everything rushes through. The unfiltered opinion. The overly personal story. The confession that was not quite ready to be confessed. The joke that went slightly too far. The truth that needed more careful packaging. All of it pours out. Because in that moment the brain is not running quality control. It is running on the pure reward of connection and stimulation. And then the dopamine fades. The gate closes again. And the brain, now back in its normal analytical mode, looks at what just came through the open gate and begins its damage assessment. That damage assessment is what you experience as regret. But dopamine is only part of the story. Researchers studying verbal impulsivity, the tendency to speak before fully processing, have identified a second critical factor: the relationship between anxiety and overtalking. This might seem counterintuitive. We associate anxiety with silence, with holding back, with being too scared to speak. But clinical research shows a very different pattern in a significant subset of anxious people. For them, talking is not the opposite of anxiety. Talking is the response to anxiety. When social anxiety activates the fear of silence, the fear of being boring, the fear of not connecting, the fear of the other person losing interest, some brains respond by accelerating verbal output rather than reducing it. The talking is not confidence. The talking is panic wearing the costume of confidence. Fill the silence before the silence can mean something bad. Keep the energy up before the connection fades. Share more, reveal more, Be more before they decide you are not enough. And so words keep coming. Not from carelessness. From a desperate and exhausting attempt to hold the connection together through sheer verbal volume. This pattern creates 4 specific traps that quietly run the lives of people who talk too much and regret it later. Trap 1: the oversharing spiral. It starts small. You share something slightly more personal than you planned. The other person responds warmly. Your brain registers connection achieved, share more. So you share more. They respond again. The gate opens wider. You go deeper. Further. More personal. More vulnerable than the relationship has actually earned yet. And in the moment it feels like intimacy. It feels like real connection. It feels like finally being truly seen. But what is actually happening is that you are creating a false depth. A manufactured closeness built on one-sided disclosure rather than mutual earned trust. And when the conversation ends and the dopamine fades, you feel it. The exposure. The vulnerability hangover. The nauseating sense of having handed someone more of yourself than they were ready to hold or than you were ready to give. Trap 2: the credibility erosion. Every time you speak more than the moment requires in a meeting, in a negotiation, in a conflict, you reduce the weight of what you say. Words are like currency. Spend them freely and they lose their value. The person who speaks constantly trains the people around them to filter, to half listen, to wait for the moment when the volume finally reduces to something essential. And then that essential thing arrives buried under 20 other things and nobody catches it. The painful irony is that the person who talks most often has the least impact per word, while the quiet observer who has been waiting and watching drops one sentence into the room and it lands like a verdict. Credibility is built through restraint as much as through content. And every unnecessary word is a small withdrawal from the account. Trap 3: the relationship damage you do not see in real time. In close relationships, romantic partnerships, deep friendships, family dynamics, overtalking creates a specific and slow building damage. When one person consistently dominates the verbal space, the other person gradually stops trying to fill it. Why would they? There is no room. The conversation has already been claimed. And over time the relationship shifts. The overtalker becomes the one who expresses. The other person becomes the one who listens. And what began as an imbalance becomes the architecture of the relationship. The overtalker often does not notice this happening because from the inside it feels like connection. They are sharing. The other person is present. Everything seems fine. But the other person is slowly disappearing from the conversation. And when they eventually disappear from the relationship too, the overtalker is always shocked. They never saw it coming. They were too busy talking to notice the silence growing on the other side. Trap 4: the 1 a.m. trial. This one needs no scientific explanation. You know it intimately. The conversation ends. The social environment disperses. The dopamine clears. And the brain, now running cold and analytical, begins its review. It finds everything. Every overstatement. Every overshare. Every moment where you talked over someone. Every opinion delivered with more force than it deserved. Every personal detail handed to someone who probably did not need to know it. And it does not just note these things. It prosecutes them. With full cross-examination. With worst-case interpretations of how each moment was received. With vivid reconstructions of the expressions on people's faces that your anxious brain has probably distorted beyond recognition. This nightly trial is exhausting. It is also almost entirely inaccurate. But it feels like the truest assessment of who you are. And it sends you into the next social situation carrying the weight of the last one, which often makes the anxiety worse, which makes the overtalking worse, which gives the next trial more material. Round and round. Forever. Until something changes. So where does this actually come from? In most cases, the roots of chronic overtalking and post-conversation regret can be traced to one of 3 origins. First, a childhood where being interesting was required for love. Some people grew up in environments where attention and affection were not freely given but had to be earned. Through being entertaining. Through being engaging. Through keeping the adults around them interested and amused. Those children learned if I stop being interesting, I stop being valued. And that lesson runs on an invisible loop decades later in every social situation. Second, a history of not being heard. People who were consistently talked over, dismissed, or ignored by parents, by siblings, by peers sometimes develop an urgent and compulsive relationship with being heard. The overtalking is not ego. It is the overcorrection of someone who spent years being invisible and cannot quite believe that they have finally been given the floor. Third, an anxious attachment style. For people with anxious attachment, the deep and persistent fear that connection is fragile and can disappear without warning, conversation becomes a constant performance of worthiness. Keep talking. Keep being interesting. Keep the other person engaged. Because the moment you stop, they might realize they do not need you here. The goal is not to become someone who never speaks freely. Spontaneity, warmth, and verbal generosity are genuinely beautiful qualities when they are not running on panic. The goal is to bring the conscious mind back into the conversation before the gate swings fully open so that what comes out is chosen rather than just released. Principle 1. Install the 2-second pause. Before responding in any conversation, especially one where you feel excited, stimulated, or slightly anxious, build in a 2-second pause. Not a long silence. Just 2 seconds. Enough for the prefrontal cortex, the brain's rational decision maker, to briefly come online before the dopamine fully takes over. In those 2 seconds, ask one question. Does this need to be said right now? Not is this interesting? Not will this keep them engaged? Just does this need to be said right now? You will be surprised how many things answer no. And how much lighter you feel walking away from conversations where those things stayed where they belong. Principle 2. Practice the art of the incomplete sentence. One of the most powerful conversational skills a chronic overtalker can develop is learning to stop before they feel finished. Most overtalking happens because the brain is chasing a feeling of completion, of having fully expressed, fully explained, fully convinced. But that feeling of completion almost never arrives. There is always more to add. Another angle. Another example. Another qualifier. Practice ending sentences before they feel complete. Leave something out. Create a small space at the end of what you said. 2 things will happen. First, the other person will fill that space, which is what conversation actually requires. Second, you will discover that the incomplete version of what you said was usually more powerful than the fully exhausted version would have been. Mystery is more compelling than completion. Always. Principle 3. Reprocess the regret differently. The 1 a.m. trial is not going away immediately, but you can change your relationship to it. When the replay starts, instead of treating each remembered moment as evidence of your fundamental inadequacy, try treating it as data for next time. Not "I am so embarrassing," but "okay, I notice I went too deep too fast with that story. I will watch for that trigger next time." Not "why can I never control myself?" but "I notice that when I am excited I lose the pause. I can work on that." This is not toxic positivity. It is converting punishment into information. And information is actually useful. Punishment just makes the anxiety worse for next time. The goal is not a perfect conversation. The goal is a slightly more conscious one. And slightly more conscious, practiced consistently over time, becomes something that changes your life. The person who talks too much and spends the night regretting it is almost never the careless, thoughtless person the world assumes they are. They are usually someone who feels everything so intensely that words cannot come out fast enough to contain it. Someone who wants connection so badly that they pour themselves out completely in the hope of finding it. Someone whose enthusiasm, whose warmth, whose hunger for real human contact is so alive and so urgent that it overflows the banks every single time. That is not something to be ashamed of. That is something to be understood and redirected, and gently, carefully brought under the guidance of the conscious mind, not to diminish it, but to give it the precision it deserves. Because the person who has that much to say, when they finally learn to say the right things at the right moment, becomes one of the most compelling, most magnetic, most genuinely connecting presences in any room they walk into. You were never too much. You were just uncontained. And there is a difference. If this video described a pattern you have been living with for years, leave a comment. Tell me, what is the one thing you said in a conversation that you wish you could take back? I genuinely want to hear your story. Hit like and share this with someone who always texts you after a hangout saying, "Ugh, I talked way too much tonight." They need to see this. I'm Charles. Subscribe so we keep exploring the hidden sides of psychology together. Goodbye, and I'll see you next time.